it can come from a lack of understanding the expectation or goals or objectives of the organization. Like there's a lot of contributing factors that go into what we're talking about here. Intent to stay, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For money to be out of the discussion, you have to pay that person enough. And even not the money, the culture has to be strong and it has to fit that person's expectation of a culture, right? Because like if you have somebody that comes into your culture and they just don't mesh well with them, it doesn't really matter what type of culture you build. It's just not for them. But this is what we're talking about. And that's important for understanding in the hiring process. But the intent to stay comes from a lot of different things. Like, and then all that has a factor to do with well-being. Are you overworking your employees? Are you asking them to work overtime over and over and over and over and over again? Or are you not giving them time off? Are you bombarding them after hours, right? Hey everyone, it's Zach Wright, founder of Grapevine Software, the virtual office platform for your hybrid and remote organization to stay connected, informed, and engaged from anywhere in the world by centralizing your communications and information into one platform. But let's get to why we're here. This is the Future of Work weekly report for this week. For anybody that's returning, thank you for being a returning listener. We really put these out here to inform you and guide you into staying ahead of the future of work. And for anybody that is here for the first time, this is where we talk about the hottest headlines and trending topics happening in the future of work. So anything from remote, hybrid, flexibility, AI, productivity, employee experience. That's what we're going to be talking about. And today, we're going to be talking about employee experience. We've touched on this topic a few times on the Future of Work weekly report, but this specific one comes from Qualtrics 2025 Employee Experience Trends Report. So that's where they're surveying 35,000 people, employees, to get their understanding of the work landscape, specifically in employee experience. And so I wanted to do this one as we approach 2025. So any organization out there listening can kind of use this, dive into it deeper. So download the Qualtrics report. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. So we'll link out to their landing page so you can get access to it. And at the end of this video, I might share my screen and run through some of the charts that I've seen. So let's go ahead and talk about where we found this information. It's coming from a Forbes article written by Phil Kirschner, and the article is Onboarding and Unburdening, New Rules for Employee Experience in 2025. Now, this was published December 2nd, 2024, so Monday. And as we always do, we're going to go through the highlights. We have 5 highlights this weekly report. And a lot of them are going to be statistics. So we'll read through the statistics and then I'll add my insights or comments as we go through and as they pop into my head, because this is not scripted. All right. So highlight number 1, we're talking about onboarding's role in retention. So the statistics that they call out here is 1, 43% of employees surveyed said their onboarding experience exceeded expectations. Now, they didn't say whether it was remote, in-office, or hybrid setting. So I don't really know if it's 43% of in-office or if it's just across the spectrum. So just so you guys know. Number 2, despite improved onboarding, employees within their first 6 months report 21% lower intent to stay compared to more tenured colleagues. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then candidate experiences, however, lag behind, with only 22% finding their journey exceeded expectations, a stark contrast to onboarding outcomes. So you can kind of look at these statistics as beginning onboarding, middle, kind of, because within that first 6 months, they're already saying that they're probably going to step out and go somewhere else. And then the end is what they reported after they had the entire experience at the company, right? And so whenever we see 43% of employees surveyed saying that their onboarding experience exceeded expectations, you might at first glance say, oh, well, that's actually pretty good because it's somewhat of a high number. But let's take it into perspective. If you hired 50 new employees and you only had 43% saying that their experience exceeded expectations. I wish I knew what was met expectations, because maybe it's in the 70s. So take this with a grain of salt. But if you have 50 employees coming on board and only 43%, let's keep it simple, 50% say that it exceeded expectations, that's only 25 employees. That's half. So if you're not measuring your onboarding expectations from your employees, one, you should do that, because that's the only way to know if you're meeting those expectations or exceeding or not meeting them at all. So one, let's make sure that we're doing that. And then two, if you're only meeting 43% exceeding expectations, and let's just say that it's 80% or 75%, to keep the numbers even, if it's 75% of people either meeting expectation or exceeding expectations, well, if you have 100 employees, you still have 25 employees that are not going to be there. And that's a lot of wasted time, effort, and money, because as they churn, as they have higher attrition in your organization, that just impacts you over and over and over. And it's like this flywheel of money exiting the organization and never really being able to get back on top. So that's the beginning part. And so there's areas for improvement, but it does say that it is higher than it was. So we're moving in the right direction, at least with this approach. But what we're not seeing is that data in previous years was saying that whenever you have a really good onboarding experience, then employees are more likely to stay in that company longer. But what we're seeing with this employee experience trends from Qualtrics and the Forbes article is saying that despite the improved onboarding, employees within their first 6 months report 21% lower intent to stay compared to more tenured colleagues. So there's some type of gap that's happening here. And I don't know if it's the way that the more tenured employees are being treated after onboarding, or if it's that those more tenured employees have a different mindset or framework on how they operate. So I'm going to dig into the entire employee experience trend report from Qualtrics after this. I read the Forbes article, but I didn't go through because it's a 44-pager. So we got a lot of things to digest there. But it's very interesting to see that. And I typically go off of data, but since I don't have the data in front of me, I just want to say I think that what we're seeing here is a possibility of a few different things. One is just the times changing, right? We used to, I know as I was coming up in my career, there was don't job hop because it's bad. It will be tougher and tougher to get a position. I used to work in IT staffing, recruiting, and if they had short tenures, it was hard to get them hired, even though they were getting hired as a contractor, right? So it's kind of backwards anyway. But I think that there's just an adaptation and evolution of how we're looking at tenure in organizations. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. The other aspect is, as we go to a more remote or hybrid approach, you have to be very, very intentional on how you onboard your employees, but then keep that continuous onboarding going on through their entire journey in your organization, right? Onboarding doesn't just stop 30, 60, 90, 6 months. It has to continue to keep going, because if you invest in your employees, they're going to stay longer. That's where that culture comes from, right? And culture isn't just pizza parties, ping pong balls, couches in the break room, TVs, or anything like that. Culture is actually the set of behaviors that you reward and recognize your employees for doing, right? You have your core values. You should reward based off of those because you identified those as the type of culture that you want in your organization. And so I think what could, let me go back to hybrid and remote. What I was saying there is that if you're not intentional about one, onboarding, and then two, continuous onboarding, and then three, making sure that they feel like they belong, because it's easy as a remote and hybrid organization to have somebody fall to the wayside based off of proximity bias, based off of them maybe being a little bit shy and not being able to speak up. So you have to get the right tools where people can stay at the forefront of people's minds so they aren't forgotten and they can easily reach out to people. And that's where Grapevine can come in for especially remote organizations and hybrid organizations, because rather than having that proximity, I can't say it, proximity bias, proximity bias. Anyway, I give up on that. Rather than having that, what you actually have is this centralized platform that acts as your virtual headquarters. And so it doesn't matter if the person is in the office or not, you guys are all interacting in that same setting. And not to mention, you can also store the information that you're sharing, so it makes it easier, which saves people time on whenever they're looking for information, so on and so forth. But okay, enough about Grapevine. And then we talk about the lagging behind. 22% finding their journey exceeded expectations, a stark contrast to the onboarding. So we can see a 21 percent drop from onboarding exceeding expectations to the journey exceeding expectations. Again, very important for the centralized platform, or just to make sure that that continuation of caring about the employee and their experience is at the forefront of what you're doing. And it doesn't mean babying them, but it means checking in with them, giving them growth opportunities, correcting them whenever they're not performing, giving them clear expectations about what it is that they need to do and when they need to do it by, so on and so forth. If you don't give that continuously, then you're going to slowly, it's kind of like the presidential's approval ratings over time, right? They start off high because people are excited about them, and then over time they start taking acts and it goes down. That's what's going to happen if you don't take an intentional approach. So that's highlight number one. I'll try to go through this a little bit quicker. It's going to be a long video. Highlight number two is the impact of burnout on engagement. So the first statistic here is 38% of employees report feeling pressure to increase productivity. This is kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier that I mentioned we would talk about. So let's go ahead and go to statistic number two because it's related. The pressure correlates with significant drops in engagement, negative 12%, intent to stay, negative 14%, and well-being, negative 13%. Now, the person that they continuously quote in the Forbes article is Dr. Granger, and they emphasize the need for organizations to focus on reducing operational inefficiencies, not just adding perks. So I think why he's calling this out is because if we think about the significant drop in engagement, the intent to stay, and well-being, a lot of CEOs, leaders think of these three things, engagement, intent to stay, and well-being, as the perks, right? So if we give you benefits, if we give you unlimited PTO, if we give you extended FMLA, if we give you a stipend for your home office or co-working space, or we give you lunch credits or whatever the case is, or pizza parties and ping pong like we talked about before, they think that this only has to do with the soft stuff in the organization, but that's actually incorrect, right? Engagement can come from a lack of good leadership. It can come from a lack of understanding the expectation or goals or objectives of the organization. Like, there's a lot of contributing factors that go into what we're talking about here, intent to stay. It could be that you don't pay them enough, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for money to be out of the discussion, you have to pay that person enough. And even not the money, the culture has to be strong, and it has to fit that person's expectation of a culture, right? Because like, if you have somebody that comes into your culture and they just don't mesh well with them, it doesn't really matter what type of culture you build. It's just not for them. So they're going to leave anyway. But this is what we're talking about. And that's important for understanding in the hiring process. But the intent to stay comes from a lot of different things. So money, motivation, growth opportunities, connection to the purpose, the meaningfulness of their objectives that they have to achieve, the impact that the company itself is doing, the leader that they have. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they micromanagement? Are they too macro management? Are they just right? Like Goldilocks? Like, and then all that has a factor to do with well-being. Are you overworking your employees? Are you asking them to work overtime over and over and over and over and over again? Or are you not giving them time off? Are you bombarding them after hours, right? Are they working outside of hours? Whether it's your fault or their fault or just the industry's fault, right? And all of these things contribute to the productivity, right? And so really what we're saying here is 38% of employees report feeling pressure to increase productivity. To me, that is a culture issue, but it stems from the way that the organization is ran, right? And that's what Dr. Granger is saying here is operational inefficiencies, right? And so what we're trying to do at Grapevine, not to make this all about Grapevine, but it is part of the reason that we do this, is our workflows are simplifying that interaction between communication, information, and knowledge in your organization, right? So instead of having to go to Slack and then go to email and then go to Salesforce and then go to Google Docs and then Google Slides and then Notion, you just have all of it in Grapevine. And that's another thing is whenever you feel like you can self-serve, right? Then the ability to do your work better and faster without the pressure actually becomes a reality, right? And so that's why we're strongly focused on this and trying to simplify the workflows so it can help employees in the long run. All right. So now we're going to go to highlight number 3. So let me get a sip of the coffee. All right. Okay. Highlight number 3 is trust and flexible work. So 56% of employees feel leadership prioritizes short-term gains over their well-being. So number 2, hybrid workers report more positive experiences compared to their fully remote or on-site counterparts. We'll talk about that. And then the last one is building trust through transparency and balancing organizational and individual needs remains a critical challenge. So let's just take it one by one. 56% of employees feel leadership prioritizes short-term gains over well-being. So this is, again, a lot of this, I mean, I guess employee experience can almost be used interchangeably as the company culture, because this is what the culture allows, and it comes from the top, right? And so what they're actually saying is that leadership doesn't really care about the balance, the work-life balance, because that's incorporated with well-being or psychological well-being. And so what needs to happen here might be found in the second bullet point, which is hybrid workers report more positive experiences. And that, I think, is because they have this experience a little bit of working remotely or at home. And then they have this experience of in the office, face to face with their manager, with their team. And being able to balance that out actually helps the person's well-being. Now, the fully remote part, I think, actually comes down to the technology not being there just yet, which is what we're creating, right? There's other tools out there, but they're not focused on actually getting the work done and centralizing the communications and information and knowledge while also being able to do the work inside of one system. And that's what we're focused on. And the reason that we're unique is because we actually have employee profiles and employee directories inside of the same place that you're exchanging communication and you're creating documents or files or spaces or pages or whatever. And you're also able to store outside information. So if it's from OneDrive or Google Drive, we have a Google integration. We don't have Microsoft just yet, but we're working on it in the future. And then we're going to hopefully integrate with a lot more. But basically, we're software agnostic. So if you look at like a Google Drive or a OneDrive, you typically have to bring in the document or the file or the PowerPoint or slides or whatever, and it has to convert to a OneDrive. With ours, you can actually bring it in with the link or just upload it from your desktop and store it like it's in your Google Drive or OneDrive, but instead it's in Grapevine. And when you click on it, it takes you there. So it helps you organize. It's all in one. And the reason that I say all that is because whenever you create an employee experience like that and you're 100% remote, it actually brings the human element back to life, right? Now, the on-site counterpart is, I think that they just have realized, they being the employees, have realized the possibilities and the beauty of either remote or hybrid work and the flexibility and freedom that it gives them. So doing the opposite actually hurts the trust and all that. And so, which leads to the third bullet point, which is building trust through transparency and balancing organizational and individual needs remains a critical challenge. I think that this is going to become easier with tools like Grapevine, not just Grapevine. There's probably others out there. We just haven't seen them. But I think tools like Grapevine are going to allow organizations and especially leaders to trust their employees without them having or without them feeling like they need to be in the office 100% of the time. Right. So that's what we're hoping that we can drive through to the future of work, is the ability to be more flexible, inclusive, and make work more fulfilling all at the same time with our approach to increasing employee experience, but also getting the work done. All right, let's go to highlight number 4. So highlight number 4 is AI and the evolving candidate journey. The rise of AI in recruiting has created what Dr. Granger calls an arms race, but expectations on how AI is used remains unclear. So I think what he's saying here is just, well, let's keep going and then we'll talk about it. So while 61% of employees want AI to assist with tasks they control, only 29% are comfortable with AI handling job interviews. And then lastly, they just call out Chipotle here for saying Chipotle are exploring conversational AI to enhance transparency and candidate confidence during the hiring process. So I actually don't know what that means fully, because it can mean a lot of different things. Is the AI interviewing the person, and then if they pass that interview, they go to the next round? Is this like a glorified application tracking system? I don't know. But let's just talk about the arms race. And then 61% employees want AI to assist in tasks they control. And then 20% or 29% are uncomfortable. So I would just summarize this, because this video might get long. I'm just going to summarize this section as saying, like, AI is becoming a bigger part of the recruiting process and the candidate journey. And what we're seeing, at least from this survey, is that 61% are okay with that to a certain extent, where they can control certain things. So I would say that doesn't include using AI to have an application tracking system that scans, like we've had in the past, and says, oh, nope, they're not. But what I could see is AI actually being able to internalize more than just keywords and look at somebody's section of their resume and say, okay, boom, boom, boom. This is, and also analyzing the LinkedIn profile. So there's a lot of different things that the AI ingested approach to recruiting could actually enhance the ability to find the actual right candidate, and to factor in the biased option of overcoming a human bias by being able to say, put in these guardrails and say, don't look at name, don't look at race, don't look at place that they live, especially if it's remote. So all that kind of stuff, right? And then 29% saying that they're comfortable with AI handling is actually higher than what I would think, because I know that people don't like they don't know ATS or application tracking systems, but whenever you tell them about that, they're like, oh, that sucks, because I put a lot of work in this resume, and just maybe because I didn't use the exact keywords or whatever, I'm going to get overlooked. So that's all that we'll say on highlight number 4. So we can go to highlight number 5. So highlight number 5 to end this Future of Work weekly report is the rise of mental health and disability awareness. So the first stat is 25% of respondents reported having a long-lasting physical or mental health condition, with 23% saying it affects their daily activities. So they report having long-lasting physical or mental health conditions, and of that, 23% says that it actually affects their daily activities. And so the other part that they call out here is this increase may reflect rising burnout, broader definitions of disability, and declining stigma, which is important. We'll talk about that. And then just the last one here is organizations must design listening and experience programs that address the needs of this significant and growing group. So I can see where a lot of people out there, especially if they're older and they've gone through like the blue collar side of work, or they've gone through like that tough management side of work, like do it my way or you're fired and all that kind of stuff. I can see where they can look at this and say, they just need to tighten up, toughen up, but there are different things out there that can induce some of these things, right? So not necessarily long lasting physical conditions, that might be something out of control, but the mental health conditions, whenever we think about social media, whenever we think about scams, and we think about just all this type of stuff that comes into play, we can see why there might be an increase of these long-lasting mental health conditions, right? And we do have to take that into consideration, but at the same time, I think we also have to find that balance of, okay, where do we draw the line? And I know that's difficult because everybody's different. They have their own disabilities, they have their own mental health approaches and outcomes and reactions. But I think we do have to find that threshold where, if it is a disability that is fully affecting how you do your work and your performance is being affected, something has to happen, right? Because although we want to empathize and sympathize with those people, and I'm speaking to somebody that has anxiety and depression, and so like, although we want to empathize and sympathize, we still have a job to do. And as the founder of an organization, I can't continue to pay you for less than adequate work, right? And that's for anybody. It's just we're talking about the disabilities and the mental health aspect of it. And so even though there are disabilities and mental health stuff, you can find ways to work with that person to figure out what is the best way to work with it. For example, in the previous role, I had a coworker or a direct report that had major back issues, right? And we worked 100% remote. And so I didn't care if they had to go lay on the couch for 2 hours to prepare for the demo, as long as they were prepared and as long as they were ready and good to go. And they always were. right? So it never became an issue. But if there ever were times that maybe performance started slacking a little bit, or there was a lot of time being taken off, we would have to talk to them, right? And I think that that's just how you balance it, right? And I do think that like the increase may reflect rising burnout. I think that we have to also bring in elements of how employees on their own. This is kind of tapping into my thesis paper, because in my thesis paper, I was talking about how the organizations are responsible for an employee's psychological well-being to a certain extent, but then at some point, the employee also has to be responsible for their psychological well-being or happiness in that term, right? And so that's what I'm talking about here, is that both sides have to be accountable, and you have to work with one another to understand what is the appropriate manner for them to work, for you to make sure that they get their work done and the company doesn't suffer as a result. As long as we do that, then we're good to go. If it ever gets into the issue of this person isn't performing, then we have to have those tough conversations, and we have to give them a chance. We have to coach them on what's going on. If they don't see the improvement, then unfortunately we have to move on and hire somebody else who can do the performance part, whether or not they have a disability, right? Okay. So that is the Future of Work weekly report. I was going to share, actually, I will share my screen just because I want to show you. Let me get the window over here. And so what I want to do here is just kind of tap into some of these charts that we're seeing. So you can see engagement here. So engagement is actually up compared to previous years. So you can see it was down at 66. Now it's up to 71. And I think that something that has to be taken into consideration here is the flexibility or remote work. So people are actually more engaged because they're not working all the time. And if they are, they have the flexibility to work when they're most productive, right? Expectations exceeded. We can see that it was low down to 32. Now it's up to 53, but still at the same time, we see within 6 months that drops down to 21%, is either 21 or 22%. Intent to stay 3+ years. You can see that it's significantly gone down 70 to 64. Inclusion, roughly the same. We saw a little bit of a dip over here. And then well-being is up just a little bit as well, but still kind of hovering over there. So all of these have room for improvement, but seem to be in a decent direction. So this is just basically saying that over time, we've been seeing more feedback cadences. So instead of just waiting until the employee survey at the end of the year, companies are taking survey check-ins, checkpoints of their employees over time. That could be with the rise of certain technology. I know whenever we used Lattice at the last company, every single week, it would ask you how you're feeling, what did you do this week, and what are you planning on doing next week? And so they kind of get that sentiment score. And so they're able to kind of monitor as people go instead of on an annual basis. Let's see, survey employees comfortable with passive listening. Yeah, so 38% of employees are feeling pressure from their employers to increase productivity. We talked about this. The impact on key indicators when employees feel productivity pressure, the engagement goes down. So it goes from 79 to 67. Intent, same. It goes from 72 to 58. And then well-being goes 82 to 69. So all of those are negative impacts on somebody actually staying at the organization. The engagement, even if they do stay at the organization, the productivity is going to go down. Same thing with well-being. So it's important to make sure that these are areas that you're focusing on as an organization. Let's just keep going. I don't want to make this too long, but let's see. All right, so this one is, let me just scroll over. Young employees are surprisingly the most optimistic for now. So this is actually a good thing. Whenever I read this, I was surprised, one, and then two, I see this as an opportunity, because if they are the ones that are most optimistic and they're the ones entering the workforce, we actually have an opportunity to make sure that their experiences stays going up. And that would actually result in a better outcome and make work better over time, because they'll be the next generation that takes over, and they get to teach the next generation that how we did work before, we helped change that. And this is the better outcome, and this is the better approach. So it's actually an opportunity. So engagement higher, expectations exceeded higher, believe in, and they're the learning age, right? Like or the learning generation. They have YouTube, they have Google, they have ChatGPT now. There's a lot of, if you give somebody something and they can go look it up, that's what they're going to do. That's what the beauty is of this generation coming up. There's a lot of bad things, but there's still some good things to look at it. And that's how I'm looking at it here. Let me just see if there were any more important ones. I mean, I know that there definitely are, but you get the point. I don't want to extend this too much, but that is the Future of Work weekly report. We're going to put the article in the show notes, and then we'll also put the link to the landing page so you can download the Qualtrics 2025 Employee Experience Trends Report. We're not sponsored by them. We're just giving them a charity, I guess. Not that they need it, but thanks so much for listening to this weekly report. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share with other Future of Work pioneers so they can stay ahead of the curve whenever it comes to the future of work. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next weekly report.